I guess it's Indigenous Peoples Day and Columbus Day rolled into one, 2021. It has been about a week since I last stated anything, mostly because I was watching to see what was going to happen on a few things and which way they would roll. Last Friday, several things. Let's go forth. The Well, last week was a good week in a way, in a kind of bad way, in another way. Well, mostly good, I personally think. One thing is right now, especially the youngsters, first time voters who helped propel Biden in, they're a little bit of afraid because they've lived through two great crises in their lives, which is unusual. Just, and usually you get a micro crisis or a mini crisis, not some full blown crisis. And so they're a little bit more nervous about things. And also, it's the first time they've gone through what's it called? Through the sausage making, and it can be frustrating. I am exceptionally frustrated. And it's just a bit tough. But and Biden wants to get back to the president wants to get back to his normal self, which is, hey guys, having a good time and you know just being real. But I guess it's the first time we really saw just sees just his good old buddy in the Senate, Mitch, really is. And I'm starting to really think that I don't think I don't want to say yeah. I'll leave that one for another time. But one of the polls as I was doing my searching through what's in the Zeitgeist is the fact the reporting was done by CBS that few people know what's going on with the Build Back Better program. And this is what it does. It's lowering childcare if you have children, so that way you can have higher workforce participation, lower education. Once again, higher workforce participation, healthcare costs, lower risk, the lower prescription drug costs. We are the ones who actually fund most of the research and development for these prescription drugs. And up and through 1970s, most companies didn't like public good companies didn't really go after profits. They figured you get a nice 10% solid return every year. It was more of a solid, almost as if it's a bond, fixed income as it's called. So you're just getting solid dividends every month, and you can retire on that. Then the vultures come in, vulture capitalists, with Farmer Boy. That has been changing, and and it's driving up cost across everything else. But what we're seeing here, what's the reason I was saying this is because this is definitely affecting Miss Senator Sinema, and she's getting major donations from them. Home ownership, which means there's a lot of other things. We're going to get back to the tax cuts, especially making the child. I didn't. Wow, that's a good one. Because a tax cut without workers, worker class tax cut to child credit, workforce training, which is the most important part of this right here. That's where you're getting your community college, so you can constantly retrain, retool, get back and do the workforce. That's necessary and get back into the to make us competitive globally. One of the things that's going on with a lot of the companies is they're not retraining people, and then they're not wanting to pay the taxes for those people to train themselves and to retrain and keep getting better. we're still we're going into the information age as far as the workplace is concerned, but we're still our corporate leaders are still in the age of the factory thinking, factory school, cog in the machine. So I think I'm going to dive deeper into this later on because it's actually this 3 point. They keep saying it'll shrink, it'll get smaller, and get that's a bunch of hockey puck. It needs to be, you know, from a psychological perspective. President started off at at 6 trillion. Say, for instance, I'm going in to buy a property, or I'm looking at buying something. I'm looking at the product, and I'm going, okay, I know the market value is X, or I should say it's Y, and then I negotiate down, create some equity in the position. What you're saying is we're going to give you is by going below the 50% threshold, you're giving them away your equity, and then they get the equity, and then they get the cash because in this there's not much for workforce participant. This is not things to create that the the education necessary to do the things we need to do. And we need to make these investments. Trump's tax cuts were $4 trillion lost to the coffers per year, because it's only been 2 years, maybe almost three, since those tax cuts were enacted. All right, those are unsustainable. Corporates wants they of course they want their tax cuts, and it's not just the corporates; it's also the high net worth individuals. Main thing with high net worth individuals is they're mainly looking for wealth preservation, less so much. Of course, you want growth, but mostly to preserve the capital you have, as well as maintain its growth. And we saw that in the poison pill with in that they put into the bill into the Build Back Better plan, which also kind of was kind of nice because it gave away their position of what they're planning on doing and what their real strategy is. So before we get going, I just want to say, congratulations to the Democrats for standing up to Mitch McConnell. There are those who are upset about it, but you, as I want to show the filibuster has been is first, especially according to Dr. Reich. Oh, that's not the one I'm looking for. You know, and he makes a very exceptional argument, and then why we shouldn't be even using it. This is especially with Mitch McConnell, how he's abused it and the way it is. They don't have to stand on the floor or anything. We need filibuster reform because it's keeping it's actually what's keeping bipartisanship. It's the power of the minority over the majority, as opposed to the power of the majority while still listening to the minority. And it's wrong. It's totally wrong, and I agree with Dr. Wright. It's unconstitutional because it's these super majorities are destroying, ripping their country apart on purpose, and then but these corporates love it because not so much as corporates, but some certain aspects of the moneyed class love it because they just keep feeding this negative, angry feedback loop, and people are staying blind to the being ripped off. But it's and then they can still blame others, and we can see how much they love holding on to that other blame, that scapegoater, in their externalization. But so that's why it was a big deal to stand up. I think Bo, the fifth column, made it stated it most succinctly. It is as though a person who's in a domestic situation finally had the gumption to say no, enough's enough. Which leads me to Senator Manchin last week as he was getting into his vehicle. He said about the needs to be a means testing. He said two things. He said means testing and work requirements. That was a dog whistle extraordinaire, and it was actually picked up by the right wing. I would suggest you, because I saw that's when I knew it had hit, and I wanted to see how it would work out through the week. That was a dog whistle extraordinaire. That was him saying, and that's when then Manchin later putting his hands in his head when Speaker, it's not Speaker, but Leader Schumer was speaking, because he pulled that dog whistle is the others coming to get your money, and it's not usually that polite of language. It's the others are coming for your money. That's what so irks me. Well, one of the things that irks me about his intransigence is, all right, because his daughter in is paying is in part in this the EpiPen situation. Also, not only was it with the EpiPen, but the labs that that was located inside of Virginia, West Virginia, has been closed down. They're shipping that lab. They're shipping those jobs overseas. So if it's the others who are coming to take your money, it would seem that Joe and his daughter are taking their money because they're taking their ability to feed their families at a good paying job, uh, create dignity, be able to buy and own and control the wealth of the land that they've worked hard to build. They took your money. Why are you pulling the dog whistle and saying the others are coming for your money? Okay, you're cutting off your nose to spite your face. Because the reality is these companies want people poor and in pain and then squeezing out the capital. And that's part of the rhythm of capitalism. Marx said it. I'm not a Marxist. I'm a capitalist. But that's the reason they don't want you to read Marxism to understand. Oh, because Marx was the first to really show that there was these cyclical motions within capitalism and other things. But capitalism, even though it can be exploitative, we know so can communism. But and as an individualist, you have it's that balance between the communal and the individual. And I personally believe capitalism does, with the communal being within saying, okay, the individual can bring together capital and create things, but as long as the communal is getting their cut. Right now, capital is cutting the communal out, and we're seeing that, and actually it's the mainly it's trying to get capital to save itself because it's eating its own self. Okay, that's the Build Back Better plan. This is where you know, he had really good statistics here. Oh yeah, mainly worry the short-term inflation, and I think with that inflation right now, everything's somewhat transitory. We'll see what happens. But yeah, we should be very much focusing on inflation, but that's also monetary policy. But we can't do those things totally until we get to this Build Back Better policy. It's kind of this chicken egg thing with this legislation. Now, also, there's several things, but exact. So filibuster is unconstitutional because he's been using it. But there's another thing I want to show you as far as Where is it? That is not it. This is what I'm looking for. Where is that? Where are you, Reich? Wages and productivity compounded with TIPRA. This is something. There's TIPRA. Um, this is really big because uh, in the bill there's a 3.5. The last minute was placed in as my syndicators. Syndication is a type. It's a way of raising capital to buy large capital projects. And syndication attorney had a podcast on this. What was going on? So TIPRA is you have your IRA and you can grow your capital in it tax deferred or tax free depending on what type of IRA you have. And you can grow it. And so what they did in 2005 or 2010, as they said in the podcast, there was a change. You were able. They are very uber wealthy. Everyone was able actually to change their IRA to a Roth IRA, grow it. And what happened is now the Fed's dumping. What now? What happened is from a tax perspective, very large concerns, large capital. The Fed is pumping money into the stock market for the last decade, so they have had all of this capital built in as they've grown. Now the Fed's trying to taper, and what's feared is what they were going to show is that they're going to drop the economy as I've stated, because that's what Trump brought in. Not Garland, well, whoever's I think is Garland in right now, brought him in because Trump only brought people in that he thought he can bully and manipulate. Period. If a person's around Trump, is because they're everyone's saying it's useful. No, what's useful is a tool. It's like a garden, like a fork or something. They are going to do what I want them to do when I need them to do it. And you would see that when he would start tapering, Trump would throw out a bunch of tweets and tapering would stop and come back up. So, oh yeah. So what happened is all of this cash was in since 2009 has been growing in these 400 or so accounts, and that wasn't really the big deal. What was really the big deal is if the bill went through, what they were going to do, and they did it outside a committee, so it was kind of one of those thrown in and no one would notice it. Is when you read it, is 2001, 21, it would sit there, it would trigger a situation where it would force regular IRA holders out of their positions. So that way they would give up their positions in real estate. And now all of these people with capital would then move their IRA money into the real estate. These people would be, these large, mom and pops, middle class persons would be forced out of their positions. Big money would come in and steal it. I should say, would come in and take their positions. The prices would go down, cap rates would go up, they would make more money because rents would not change even though the building is changing hands. So that would push out a lot of people, and that would get us back to which gets us back to Miss Cinema because she's getting money from the S corps, C corps, and lobbyists, as well as pharmaceuticals. And one of the reasons she's stopping everything. And which puts her in an unusual position because Miss Cinema's main seems is she just wants to hobnob and be with the elite. Yet she's doing everything she can to really, yeah. Well, we're gonna get back to that one in a later video, probably tomorrow, because this one's taking a while because there's also so many things that are on my mind and it takes so long to get them all out there that you know Miss Senator Cinema is doing the behest of her big donors, and we need to get to the point where we start getting the Democrats need to get the messaging down on the infrastructure down to people in Tucson, people in Mesa, people in Phoenix that it's incredibly popular programs that's going to help them be able to go back to work or to find better work to better and to take care of their families, to take care to do the things that they want to do. To be honest with you, live their life the way they want to live it, and she's holding all this up, both her and Manchin. So the first thing that needs to be done, is get rid of the filibuster, and then and then also get we need to give put in HB 40 just to have a heck of it. But it's the voting rights. It's all down to voting rights. We're seeing this because all of these problems, a lot of these, there's always going to be problems no matter what era you live in. But a lot of these problems could be solved with voting rights. We're disproportionately being governed by an extremely smaller and smaller first money class and then an ideological class of the country, and they're very toxic actually. When you think of how they do things, they're exceptionally toxic. Bannon has always said we're deconstructing the administrative state. All states have administrations. And since you're deconstructing it, what are you going to replace it with, Bannon? And we know what he's going to replace it. It's not going to be a secular nation, that's for sure. Because if he's following the Putin playbook, that means you put one religion over the other, and therefore you then becomes king and individual. Secularism gets is counter to that. The other thing you need to go through right now is police reform. You, Senator Booker put in great work, worked directly with the police associations. I'm not sure if he worked with the unions, but I'm pretty sure he did. What do they want? What do they believe? It's how do these things in policing work? We're seeing good feedback on some of these ideas. Granted, the gangs are killing each other, but we can, but realistically, really, we need to get this done because with police reform done correctly, they know, okay, these are the guardrails. The guardrails are there to protect both me, if you're a police officer, and and the civilians. And now you have these guardrails in, and then you're in between those guardrails, protect and serve. You know what I mean? But without these guardrails, it and the thing is, there's a lot of people that they still want that old style of slave patrol policing because they're fighting against something the cops themselves want. So it tells you something's up. So what was I at? Oh yeah, and then the one last thing. I was reading the Hollywood Reporter, and apparently, first saying Bob Iger's long, but as you read through it, um, is this, and leaders of every is, and it's not just the mind-bending paydays, but what also comes down in here is so he gets the theme park, so he understands uh, the the attraction, the visceral, physical parts. So you go from imagination, to use I guess even just use Star Wars. You're going from the nah, well, that's not that far out. You're going from the imagination to reality. So you're going from imagination, watching a movie or watching whatever. Then they to the toys, and then they're moving to different levels of their imagination to be in reality of that imagination, and at different age states and different interactions. But it's always from imagination to reality, back from reality, back in imagination, and then you have memory, and then you get into that 20 and 40-year cycle of multi-generational cycle. But what apparently, more so as I read all this, is is that talent. Because I know for a fact, if he's especially with the bean counters, he's getting in there, and then you have old Kennedy, who's all about the IP, which I'm all about the IP as well, obviously. But I'm not a jerk. I don't know if Miss Kennedy's a jerk. I have never met her, but I've only had to deal with what I've done with language. So, in this, and I shouldn't be calling him out. What you put me through, yeah, I have every reason to call you names, but it would seem from the way this is reported, he's realizing he's running a really big company with a lot of money, and so he's running into his first his what I call the first what I call his first trial, first Jedi trial. You have this situation where talent creates profits, and you need talent to be a little stupid, but profits need to be disciplined. And you know, JPEG's more like Hondo, little piggies. He always takes care of his piggies. But in doing this, he's moving more into the Jedi realm, so to speak. And so, more of a force wielder, and will he be corrupted by the capital? Can he? Should he be paid more? Most definitely. It depends for the size of the company, but it should also be on the is he giving the cast members, that means all the way down to everyone in the parks, because that's also part of the experience of the movie. Is he raising their wages? Is he helping them with their families? Or because when that's that back to the Tokyo the rice thing, we're vibes, we're energy, and I'm not into the flaky oh hey man, where is he man? That ain't made it. It's but we are energy, we are emotional energy that's transferable. That's what a meme essentially is. And we do have these vibrations, and we do go into rhythms with each other. That's one of the neatest things of watching people. Is like, wow, they don't even know that they start watching people flowing in and out of rhythm, even without even knowing they're flowing in and out of rhythm. And so it's you, judging from the conversation Miss Kennedy was speaking about the IP, she's more worried about the IP, and that's a very good whisper point for Mr. Chapek to get into his psyche. And as but there is as is above, so is below, and all that capital that flows out of all that intellectual property comes from talent that's allowed to be its absolute best. Hollywood has gone through this before, where the bean counters got too controlly, and they end up screwing everything over, and we got crap movies, and then they try to just beat everything into death. That is the situation where he is at. If he looks too much to the money, he makes less. If he overdoes it looking for talent, he can't make as much money. So it has to, but most of your capital. So let's say, for instance, you have $30 billion with brand capital or $20 billion of brand capital. That's usually going to equate to about 40 or $60 billion in actual true capital in revenues. You need that emotion state to create the capital state, and a lot of times businesses will cut the emotion state or the brand synergies, squeezing out capital, and they could keep going, but then they have to keep whipping the people, and you end up getting burnt out, and then you get just really horrible people in the long term. And then for a brand that's such as Disney, which is all about the families, that's counterproductive. But he is JPEG is actually just going through his there's a little battle going on there. But the main thing is that you know he realizes he holds fast to not get lost and not get pulled into just purely being, oh, I got the numbers, because he'll lose the numbers if he doesn't. And it's not in Miss Kennedy's best interest for Chapek to, well, it is and it isn't. The more she, if she feels she has him under control, then she won't make his life miserable. That's just the basically. She's basically thinks she's going to be the shadow CEO just by her nature. I would bet upon it. And it will seem to be. That's guess that's what I was looking at when I read that article in the Hollywood Reporter, because it's like, okay, but we'll see what happens. It's a lot of money, and it's hard for people to balance. But we'll see. I hope he remembers. Would you do? You should ask yourself. I always ask myself, would I do this if I was only getting paid $1? If you can do it with only getting paid $1, then you can make a heck of a lot more than $1. And speaking of which was the main thing, which gosh, I don't know how long this one's gonna be. It's gonna be forever. VP Harris as this was the one main thing I needed to do. Is it's been on my mind the most is Vice President Harris needs to. It's this is where sometimes rambling. Right now, as we've stated, the presidency is more powerful than Congress, which is shouldn't happen. And so, Vice President Harris is it needs to be as the emissary of the people to the executive, and the emissary of the executive to the people, but wholly dependent upon the executive for their political survival, which Mike Pence can't seem to understand. That's why he was chosen, because he was be easily run over. The difference between that Mike Pence and Vice President Harris is as expected to take over several roles that I don't think she realizes that she's expected to probably take over or to have, but the time is not right now. She'll know when it's time. The main one right now is getting, and she has stated that she's willing to, and is voting rights. These And the president, in a bit of exasperation last week, or this weekend, says we're going to get it done. So believe it, we're going to get it done. So one of the things that has to stop happening is, well, I don't know. I sure as heck don't trust his chief of staff, and it's up to the president to say if he wants to continue. If he, but he already showed last week a vote of no confidence, even though it was subtle, by having his people go to Congress. The stream of senators rolling up straight up, thinking they can just roll up to the White House, needs to stop. That's that's not what I'm getting the feeling that's not what the Biden would want. I know that's what heck I wouldn't want, because you're trying. You know, if the senators need to speak to the president, they need to first speak with you, and then that gives the coalition that got Biden and you elected. I said you and the vice president elected the ability to say, hey, this is what, yeah, this is to be in those negotiations. They're the last, get the last word as what's coming on, right? So as right now, as I said, at 3.5 trillion, oh, we're going to lower. No, hell no, it shouldn't be lowered at all. Because even when it goes through, then it's a win for them. Because then they're going to still say, oh, we still want our tax cuts. Because one of the things Manchin said, oh, well, it's already happening. Well, is it happening on the timeline that we need it to happen? Well, you don't want the money, then we're going to take it out of in the tax cuts, because it's going to be like, okay, if you want that tax deduction, then you need to retool your factories to for more carbon, and it needs to be done by this point in time. Not more carbon, more hydrogen for a hydrogen refit, because you know that you can license the technology or develop your own technology to to leave the carbon in the ground and pull out the hydrogen. So there's all the little footy duddy they're pulling. We should never go under 3.5 or 3 trillion and $1. That's just this whole psychology, because if you go, how you enter in and how you exit a situation emotively is just as important as the actual having it, because that's a spirit. Back to that whole spirit of the law, letter of the law, which is me rambling again, but it's back to the vice president, because the reason she needs to do that is they, there was a thing on the Fox. Oh, the vice president's not down at the border yet. The whole cabinet part, most of the cabinet's down at the border. Well, would you want your super bugging you as you're trying to get some job, get the job done? No. So she was smart. She's getting it. That's her job is to get the unadulterated information from the or handle the sausage making, while the president handles the executing and the state stuff. The dog and pony shows, and her job is to make sure that as the legislation is going back and forth, it's getting to her first, and especially because on the voting rights and and the border, because now the cabinet officials, if it's working correctly, should now have all their data. Instead of presenting it to the president, it should go to the vice president and her staff. She does her they look us over staff back and forth about what they think they can do. Presents then the vice president talks to the coalition that got the president elected and go, hey, this is what we're looking at, and then she's working that angle with the Senate, then brings together and go this, or okay, works with the gets a plan together, cabinet meeting, they all talk, and then the last two people to speak about it are the president and the vice president, and then they start working the plan either through the Senate or an actualization through whatever as as the executive. But the vice president's job is to be that intermediary, and I know that Mrs. Kennedy was probably one of her largest donors, and but she's no, and will probably continuously, but she more likely gave donorship to uh, both the Republican and the Democratic Party. But it's in holding up to your donors. You have to also have to understand the constituency of the. It's not just one state, and makes it worse is it's being shown that part of the constituencies that got you elected, she's actually counter to. So it's a really tough thing. You have to take her money and her influences, but at the same time, maintaining a Heisman. And if, I feel sorry. It's a crap position, and it's interesting when you look at it from multiple perspectives. Anyways, this is enough for my rambling. This will seem longer than normal. There's a lot, and I'm probably well, yeah. Well, good luck.